Well, I wanted to cover a particular racing game for today's ADG, but it got derailed pretty hard as I ran into significant troubles trying to play it. I might try again another time, but it meant I had to quickly scramble for a backup game, and so I figured it'd be fun to talk about this little quad of ancient DOS games called the Adventure Fun-Pak. This package of games has 4 on offer: Rogue Runner, Night Bomber, Raiders of the Forbidden Mine, and The Thing, with that last one having absolutely nothing to do with the works of John Carpenter. Now, while it may seem like covering 4 games at a time would be a tall order, these 4 games are all extremely basic, but given their age, it's not too surprising. What I do find kind of surprising is that their origins are extremely poorly documented, as is going to become evident when we get into the game stats in a moment. And I mean, I tried to figure this stuff out, even going so far as to hacking into the common exe files, but no, there's a lot about these games we just don't have definitive answers to. Well, at least not anymore. So hopefully some of the gaps can be filled in later on, at which point I can add those details into the video description. The Adventure Fun-Pak was originally published by Apogee, but it's a bit unclear who developed the games for it, along with when it all came out. Scanning through the binaries, it seems all 4 games were written with and compiled using Turbo Pascal, as was most of Apogee's early software. But the confusing thing here is that Scott Miller, the founder of Apogee, wrote in a README file that these games were submitted to Apogee by outside developers. But far too much of all 4 games are too similar to each other for that to make any logical sense. What I think might be going on here is either that outside developers made the initial raw gameplay, submitted their source code to Apogee, and then Apogee cleaned it up and put their own stuff in place before release, or that no actual outside developers were involved, and Apogee simply decided to take some of the game ideas submitted to them and turn them into games. The latter of which would explain why there's no credits to any other developers, seeing as how most game developers and publishers have very clear policies in place that they don't accept outside game idea submissions, or that if you do provide any such ideas, you're effectively forfeiting your rights to them. Yeah, never send your game ideas to another developer or publisher unless you are 100% okay with them taking all the credit for them. As for the release year, the earliest file dates I was able to find for these are from December 10th, 1988. But I've also heard some people say this pack was released in 1987, and some people say it didn't come out until after the start of 1989. So late 1988 is a rough estimate as to its original release, but I can't find any conclusive information to verify the exact year this was made available to purchase. Now, in terms of the graphics, each game actually uses a different video mode. Rogue Runner runs in 40x25 text mode, The Thing runs in 80x25 text mode, Raiders of the Forbidden Mine runs in 320x200 4-color CGA, while Night Bomber runs in 640x200 2-color CGA. Remembering that the CGA 2-color mode allows you to adjust the foreground color to anything you want from the standard 16-color palette, while the background is always black, a detail which Night Bomber makes liberal use of. And in terms of audio, these games only support the PC speaker. As for its current release state, the Adventure Fun-Pak was one of the first things Apogee ever officially made freeware back in 2004, along with a handful of their other extremely old titles. And as such, it can be downloaded from pretty much any place on the net with legitimate DOS game downloads. So I'll just go ahead and recommend the usual DOS Games website at www.dosgames.com. If you want a physical copy though, good freaking luck, as this set of games was only ever distributed by mail order and through shareware vendors, and as such, finding copies nowadays is virtually impossible. So I'm actually going to go in order of what I feel is the weakest game in the pack to the strongest game in the pack, meaning we're starting off with Night Bomber. This is effectively a very rudimentary artillery game, where you have your main base, which you launch bombs from, on the far left side of the screen, and on each turn, an enemy city will show up, and you have 1 shot to bomb it out of existence by setting a launch angle between 1 and 45, with 1 hitting the spot right next to your base, and 45 hitting the far right edge of the screen. Now if you hit the city successfully, you get a point, but if you miss, then the enemy city vanishes. After you launch 12 bombs, the game ends, and you get a rank based on your final score. Now, there's a few things of note about this game. Firstly, when you launch a bomb, it's extremely difficult to track where it is in the sky because it's just a single pixel, moving really fast with no vertical syncing, thus it's constantly flickering in and out of existence. Couple that with the blue coloring, and you'd almost think there was no graphical representation of the bomb at all. But if you do spot it, you can use where it lands to help guide your next attack if the next city which shows up is near where it landed. The second thing to note is that between turns, there's a fairly good chance one or more UFOs will cross the night sky and take a pot shot at the ground below. I don't know what the odds are, but the UFO is basically coded to have a chance to hit the enemy city and score you a bonus point, miss entirely and hit a random spot, or there's a very small chance the UFO will target your base instead, which simply causes you to lose a point. Normally having the UFO hit your own base is an extremely rare event, and after playing this game numerous times, I only ever saw it happen in one run. But it happened 3 times in that single run. I ended with a score of 7 when realistically it should have been 10. But yeah, since there's not really any markings anywhere to help guide your aim, this is all about how keen of an eye you have for distance. Although you do have a few points of note on screen to help with things. For instance, if the city is directly over the first B in Bomber, then you want to fire at an angle of 23. Or if the city looks like it's directly underneath the A in Ammo Left, then you want to fire at an angle of 38. Learning to keep certain key points in mind once you discover them will help you gauge where to fire your shots and can help net you higher and higher scores. I do want to quickly point out too that you absolutely do not want to run this game on anything above a CGA card, or in DOSBox, make sure you're running with the machine type set to CGA. Because of how this game modifies the foreground color, if the card you're playing this game on supports EGA or VGA graphics, it will instead alter the background color. And while this isn't too big a deal during the main gameplay, the engine does this color flickering effect, which isn't too hard to look at in proper CGA, but is eye-shattering when it covers the entire screen in EGA or VGA. And as such, I won't be allowing the game to do that until after I stick this super low contrast filter over top. Yeah, see what I mean? Not something you want burning into your eyes for sure. Next up is The Thing, a streamlined text adventure of sorts, which is basically a slightly more advanced take on Hunt the Wumpus, and even right down to the main antagonist being the Wumpus. For those uninitiated, Hunt the Wumpus was one of the earliest computer games ever written to gain any sort of notoriety. And when I say it was one of the earliest, I really mean it, as in, that game dates all the way back to 1973, when the concept of personal computers hadn't yet been realized, and most computer systems were still mainframes with user terminals, or mini-computers which are basically desks with the computers and their terminals built right into them. In any case, the goal here is actually not to hunt the Wumpus. Instead, you're on the search for gold. The more gold you find, the higher you score. And this takes place in a cave system of sorts, though I'm not entirely certain if it's randomly generated or what. I mean, the original Hunt the Wumpus took place in a game world which was not flat, with the rooms in that game arranged to form the points of a dodecahedron, one of these. Because of that, each room was numbered, and thus you had to visit the rooms by seeing which room numbers were connected and typing in the number of the room you wanted to move to. Here, though, everything's north, south, east, and west, and some rooms are actually dead ends, though there's definitely a looping thing going on too, as at one point I managed to hit a string of rooms which formed an infinite loop along the north-south axis. For the most part, though, much of the same logic of Hunt the Wumpus is here. You have a bow and 3 arrows you can fire down corridors to potentially hit the Wumpus. You'll feel drafts when a room with a pit is nearby, but you can successfully avoid falling down pits if you find a wooden plank. And there are also rooms with bats in them which will carry you to random spots, but you can find garlic to help repel the bats. It's also possible to acquire additional arrows, and if you fire an arrow and it doesn't hit anything, you can follow the arrow into the room you fired it into and reclaim it. If you do hit the Wumpus with an arrow, though, it'll escape into a deeper section of the cave, and thus if you follow it down, you're basically entering a new floor of the caves with a new generation of gold, items, traps, etc. The idea is to simply play the game as long as you can, and to amass as big of a gold pile as you can before you either get too close to the Wumpus or fall down a pit. It's extremely basic, but at least has some semblance of strategy. That's why I consider this game to be better than Night Bomber. Rogue Runner is kind of a weird one, and almost feels like a precursor to Craws, except Craws came first, so I'm not really sure what to think in that regards. Basically, the goal is to make it through a series of randomly generated dungeons to find an object called the Heart of Courage, which I can confirm does exist, so this game actually has an end to it. There's just one little catch. Every time you enter a floor of this dungeon, you only get to see the full layout for a brief moment, then most of the walls go dark. They're still there, you just can't see them. Your goal is basically to touch the right side of the screen on each dungeon floor to proceed to the next, until you finally reach the Heart of Courage and claim it. But you also have to contend with multiple lost souls roaming around. Normally, these lost souls just try to home in on your position, but they also happen to be blocked by the walls, at least partially. Occasionally, a lost soul will just smash straight through a wall, and I don't think there's really any way to predict when or when this won't happen. They just sort of decide to do it seemingly at random. If a lost soul touches you, it's game over. No extra lives whatsoever. Thankfully, there's a bunch of items strewn around to aid in your survival. Pickaxes, teleportation scrolls, and maps. Each pickaxe is able to break through one solid wall, or can also defeat a single lost soul. You have to be sure you're the one making the attack, as lost souls can still kill you even if you have pickaxes, if you fail to actually move into the soul on your own accord to attack. Teleportation scrolls teleport you to a random position, but I think there's something weird going on with the teleportation logic because I routinely found these to pick locations which did not help me out in any way whatsoever. And then you have the maps. Every dungeon floor has one, and you need to make it a priority to get that map as soon as possible, because without it, you're going to be burning through far too many pickaxes trying to survive, since you can't just choose not to use a pickaxe. If you have pickaxes and hit a wall, you burn a pickaxe to bash through the wall no matter what. Now, if there was a way to save pickaxes for when you absolutely needed them, that would actually make the game even more playable. The other thing to watch out for too, though, is that, just like with Craws, the enemies can eat the items, and this includes the map. If the map gets eaten, that's pretty much a death sentence. So a good thing to do early in a level is to try to move into positions which will manipulate the enemies into avoiding the map. Because again, the enemies constantly try to move towards you, and thus you can use your own position to your advantage. But yeah, when it comes down to it, this is just a very, very, very simplified Craws in almost every way, except you can only move in 4 directions while the enemies can move in 8. A theme which carries on into what I feel is the best of the 4 games on offer in this pack. Raiders of the Forbidden Mine is definitely the strongest of the 4 games in the package, but still very simple, as the goal is to amass as many points as possible, hunting for gold nuggets in an abandoned mine, while Ghost down there seems to want to hoard all the gold for itself and thus wants you very dead. The deeper you get, the more valuable the gold becomes, but also the faster the ghost moves. Before you even begin playing though, you have 3 skill selections: beginner, average, and expert. But I'm not entirely certain what this affects. Let's say for one thing. On beginner, you get an extra life every time you enter a level which is a multiple of 3, whereas on average and expert, you get an extra life every time you enter a level which is a multiple of 6. Beyond that, I have no idea what's different between all 3 difficulty settings. The ghost speed seems based on the level, the rate your air drops at is the same, the amount of air boxes and gold is the same. If there's a difference, I am not finding one. But yeah, the trick here is that this is a mine, and mines go pretty deep, with air quality that's abysmally bad. So you have an air meter to worry about, which counts down at a fixed rate regardless of what you're doing. On top of this, while you can dig through as many soft walls as you'd like, this takes longer than just walking down open passages. So you have to take advantage of the existing tunnels to ensure that you're not burning through too much air, or to aid in getting away from the ghost when it gets too close. Granted, despite being the strongest game on offer in the pack, it does have one weakness in that it has the least responsive controls. Now, it is using the BIOS keyboard handler, meaning if you hold a key down, there's a delay before it starts repeating. But the controls are actually more complex than that, as whatever routine's been implemented here in the game is attempting to detect whenever you let go of a key, so as to stop your movement then and there without repeating way longer than you intended. The problem is that the timing on this isn't always perfect, so it's difficult to stop exactly where you mean to. If you try to move in a particular pattern, some of your inputs may not register properly, and if you press a movement direction too soon after a long run, it'll never register properly as the key will get grouped in with all the other cancelled inputs. Basically, the more straight lines you can move in and succeed, the less hassles you'll run into with the controls. Anytime you have to get precise is when it gets iffy. There's also a couple different ways to approach the game. Every level offers a substantial bonus for collecting all of the gold, but because the positions of everything are random, going for this bonus can eat into your air supply, not to mention makes you an easier target for the ghost roaming around, and the gold is worth considerably more points deeper down than on the early floors. To that end, if you're okay at dealing with the ghost, it's often better to rapidly complete any floor which randomizes the key and elevator close together, so you can save your air and effort for a later floor which doesn't give you that option, going for a full clear of the gold nuggets only when you're going to have to do a lot of traveling anyways. Overall, it's understandable why the Adventure Fun-Pak was one of the first things made freeware by Apogee in the early 2000s, because all 4 of the games in this pack are incredibly simple by the standards we had by that point in time. Not to mention, they do not run well natively on any hardware stronger than a typical 4.77 MHz computer. There's nothing inherently wrong with the gameplay in any of these games, it just more so reflects what was typical of independently developed software in the mid to late 80s, and even back then wasn't sold for anywhere near as much as a full commercial game on store shelves. Their times come and gone, and are neat to look back at nowadays, but you're probably only going to play each for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before you decide to move on to other things. All of the games in the pack are speed sensitive and expect a computer that's roughly on par with the original IBM PCs sold in the early and mid 80s, thus you need to set the cycles count fairly low to run them in DOSBox without them going way too fast. Most stuff of this vintage typically works best with a cycles count of 300, and the games here are no exception. They also all mostly work without doing any other changes, but because of Night Bomber in particular, you're gonna want to set the machine type to CGA as well. That way it won't flash the screen like mad when you finish a run through that one. Anywho, that'll be all for today's episode of Ancient DOS Games. Next up is going to be an ADG Pro video, coming out 2 Saturdays from now on June 3rd, where we're going to be investigating the damage rates and hit points in an action/puzzle game. Yeah, not exactly something you'd expect to be pertinent, but it kinda is, so make sure to stay tuned to see how this investigation pans out. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to everyone supporting me over on Patreon. If you'd also like to support the show directly and get some extra perks, then head on over to patreon.com/KASICK.